January this year was tough. I think this is the second year in a row I've had major seasonal affective disorder, and this year it was because we simply didn't have a winter. It was cold, it was dark, it was wet and muddy, and there was fog all over, and that shit alone was enough to clog up my whole brain. And then it feels like the whole world just decided to fall apart at the same time, and not a great time for writing. So I decided that instead of writing, I would just improvise stuff on the microphones and edit it together to be something. And that something is an autobiography through the art and media I've consumed in my 30 years of existence. The point I'm trying to get at is to sort of map out how I got to my particular tastes and proclivities, and that comes with a certain set of omissions and precautions I need to steel you against because you don't really know me. At least based on these videos alone. Some of my actual friends watch this, so...
Thank you, friend.
So first of all, most people I've ever known are going to be omitted for what should be obvious reasons. Second of all, I'm not going to talk video games or books. And third of all, I am going to curate the hell out of this. I'm mostly trying to show how things led to other things that eventually led into this channel existing, instead of just cataloging stuff I've watched throughout my whole life. There are also going to be omissions based on cringe factor. Like, there was a time I was really into Adam Sandler comedies and stuff of that nature. There's a lot of like more mainstream stuff that's just not very interesting to talk about. And yeah, I'm just going to do whatever I want. And that's kind of the final thing. I cannot divorce myself from my subjectivity, and because of that, I might come off as looking better or worse than I, initially want to, and I am somewhat unreliable because of trauma forgetfulness, and yeah, I think that's mostly it. Except that there are trigger warnings I want to give. So even though this first video is about my childhood, there's a lot of images from horror movies, so a lot of splatter, gore, whatever the word you want to use. I got into some really nasty stuff pretty early on. Otherwise, there's also a couple of images of big spiders from Eight-Legged Freaks. It's in a section where I discuss a mysterious TV channel. And last and most heavy, there's going to be some discussion of parental abuse and divorce and stuff of that nature. So if that's something you find hard to deal with, I think you should skip this whole entire series. It is a reoccurring thing, and there are things that will be a lot more difficult to deal with going forward. I care for you, and please don't subject yourself to anything that's too much. Okay, so let's get on with the show. So I was born in 1994, and my parents divorced when I was 2 years old, and I think that already predisposed me to being the person that I am, because my mom was a huge believer in letting your kids be nursed by media. She would often sit us down to just watch TV while she was doing other things, and like most people of my age range, my childhood was completely and totally ruled by the Disney Renaissance. My favorite from that bunch was Lion King. Never claimed to be an original from womb, and I used to watch it so much, like multiple times a day, and sometimes I would play in another room and just recite the dialogue while it was playing. So pretty obviously Lion King was my first media-centered hyper-obsession, but I don't want to give Disney too much credit, just mostly here to, lay out that sometimes you just gotta start from scratch. Like, you gotta go to the biggest corporation when you're like 3 years old. I was also really into the Moomins, especially the 90s Japanese animated version, which is also not an original take for a Finnish person to have. And I like legitimately think that there's something spiritually important with Moomins to the Finnish people of my generation, because like everyone was into it. And I think there's a couple of very interesting sort of things to talk about with the Moomins. The first of all, the Finnish sort of broadcast version of the Moomins is slightly different. So when the Finnish National Broadcasting Agency brought Moomins over from Japan, it was, at least from my recollection, in the NTSC format, and they completely blundered the whole process. They didn't convert shit. And so when they started broadcasting it, the Gamma channel was completely ruined, leading to a much darker image than it was supposed to be. And that led to this knock-on effect where everything that was supposed to be just the teeniest, tiniest little bit tense ended up being nightmare fuel for every 30-year-old I know, which, you know, is always an interesting bit of cultural trivia. It's one of those things that internet can't get enough of, and I know there's a bunch of other countries with their specific weird childhood cursed media things, but this was most definitely the thing for my generation in Finland, among with this thing called Morso, which I never saw, so can't really get into. Another thing I find to be under-discussed about the Moomins in the 90s is that the anime was very much a part of the post-asset price bubble Yashike wave.
If you got big guns, throw 'em up, break that hoe, split that Dutch, stick 'em up, bitch, stick 'em up, we don't give a fuck.
No matter how high energy the adventure they go on, it feels nourishing in a way that a lot of other kids shows just didn't feel, and I feel that's why a lot of people gravitated towards that show. I guess that's why some of the only worthwhile Finnish movies from the past 20 or so years seem to be about Tove Jansson, because like she's just such a prominent figure here. Those two movies being Tove and The Summer Book, which I saw literally yesterday, cried my eyes out. What an incredible movie. But I think that sort of like national but not nationalist love for her is something worth taking note. And I think like sort of getting that spirit into me from a child, like from my childhood years, did set me up towards being more open to experiences that are more of the quiet and contemplative variety. Actually, no, we can't close off this section before mentioning a buck wild project that I need people to get into. So there's this album from an artist called Gary Motherfucking Shovel called Big Pimping in Moomilaakso, which is essentially a collection of these hazy, woozy, sort of magical cloud rap beats made out of the Moomins music. And it was made by a Finnish horrorcore rapper called Sairaste, who wears like a Jason mask and mostly does music about being an alcoholic and a small-time criminal and how he loves Helsinki. And there was supposed to be a second album of stuff made under the Gary Motherfucking Shovel name, but he misplaced the USB stick. Very important note, a golden USB stick in the metro and never got it back. So the project is essentially dead and buried, but I need you to go check out Big Pimping in Moomilaakso. It's fully on YouTube and I think it's also on Bandcamp. It is insane. Alright, that's that. Let's continue. I was a pretty heavy media user essentially from birth. My mom wasn't comfortable with the idea of me playing alone or with my friends in the backyard, so she would make up these stories about teenagers who were crucifying cats on trees, and these two serial killers who were stabbing people in the heart that were operating in our area at the same time, which is really funny considering there's ever been like 3 serial killers in Finland. And because of that, I mostly spend my time indoors watching stuff, which is a real pressure cooker for selfhood. And boy, oh boy, was my childhood a good time to be an accidental contrarian. Pokemon was a huge thing back in the late 90s, but my first actual sort of media take, like the first art that I declared my own, was Digimon. And now, there's a relatable version of this story where I'm going to tell you about the schoolyard arguments over which came first, and did Digimon copy Pokemon, which were kinda dumb because realistically most people were into both, but nah, that's not the case here. The reason why Digimon was a choice in Finland mostly comes down to the dub.
Varmaan vitsi. Miksi tekisin yhteistyötä tällaisen Digimonin kanssa?
Valitut lapset ovat vihdoinkin saapuneet.
And I think even if you don't speak Finnish, you can hear the difference between that and this.
Vanhemon vei äitinikin. Isän kohtalosta en tiedä. Ei voi olla totta! Mitä jos isäkin on siepattu? Mutta kyllä kaikki selviävät. Äiti auttaa heidät taatusti pakoon sieltä.
Hirveä lemu. Teet minut hulluksi.
This dub was done by Agabi Racing Team, which was already sort of a known quantity for doing like sort of bad quality dubs. And it's just such a treasure to have them do like a huge generation defining work like this. Like they made so many choices and pretty much all of them were just the worst one they could go for. Some of the lines are so baffling they became like decade-running memes, and I just wanted to highlight a couple of them here.
Minä ratsastan!
Jätä sinut yksin nyt.
Ei se ole! Se ei ole saa!
Luottamus ystäviin on ystävyyttä.
Leomon!
I don't know, I have a lot of love for this weird fucky dub, but that's not specifically why I chose Digimon over Pokemon. I was into Digimon for essentially like 2 reasons. The first one was that Digimon, unlike Pokemon, which was a Monster of the Week show, Digimon had an overarching narrative to it. And the narrative actually had some dramatic like tension to it in a way that made it feel a lot more exciting and a lot more impactful for me. It dealt with a lot of themes that were more mature and meaningful. Like, you know, you'd have discussions about how parents separating can be a strain on your sibling relations. You had children dealing with finding out they're adopted, how expectations, even though you're succeeding, can be extremely harmful for you. But also, yeah, like Digimon had this artistry to it that I think Pokemon just didn't really have. Like, Pokemon is pretty general in its aesthetic goals, but there aren't many shows that look exactly like Digimon, which mostly comes down to the backgrounds. They have this textured, kind of rasterized, splotchy feeling to them, and they often use overlighting to create this tasteful sense of negative space.
Missä minä olen?
But yeah, I think more than anything about Digimon, the thing that stuck with me was my love for monsters, which sort of neatly combined with my pre-existing habit of watching nature documentaries and walking with dinosaurs. Like, they were all kind of monsters to me back in those days, and looking back I can see why. I had my antediluvian art and cryptid illustrations right next to my animal books, and sometimes they even coexisted, like in that card game Wild and Weird, where they had like El Chupacabra and Naki and fucking Mothman live in the same line as the human lice, antlions, wild boars, dinosaurs. Like, it was all this sort of homogeneous glob of awesomeness in my head. And I know there's like one person in my audience wagging their finger right now going, aren't Pokemon monsters as well? And, you know, on name basis maybe, but there's a difference between a pet and a monster, right? And while we're on the subject, can we talk about those nature documentaries for a little bit? Because I have this important early memory that sort of fractals out the older I get. So we had this one summer we spent with my grandparents from my mother's side on their cabin. And, I was watching Avaruanto, which was the nature documentary series on our National Broadcasting Agency's TV channel. And the ending of it kind of overlapped with this detective show, I think, that my grandma was trying to watch. And she was constantly sort of pushing us to end it early so she could catch the opening of the show. And I remember our mom wasn't okay with us watching, stuff for adults. So I protested, going like, hey, there's like sex and violence in that show. And my grandma just gave me this look and went, what are nature documentaries if not sex and violence? And that thing just kind of changed something in me. Like, when you have those mental constructions of like, what is sex and violence? And then somebody comes in and slaps you in the head like, quit being a dumbass, you don't know what you're talking about, and even if you did, you've fallen into a narrative, you goddamn rube. Like, the adult version of this is realizing that those infected hoof videos and pimple popping is essentially the same as watching an extreme horror movie. Both rely on a disgust response for a note of catharsis. Let's not kid ourselves. Watching either one is a sicko behavior. Anyways, the essence of the philosophical tool that would later on help me evaluate between what is and how do we conceptualize it was given to me in that moment. And I treasure it, even though my relationship with her is kind of fraught these days. And now that I think about it, there's another memory from the same summer that had a similar impact on me. I had a friend who lived on a farm that was sort of right next to our cabin. There was a little patch of forest that you needed to go through if you wanted to go there. And he had this little hovel, sort of like a clubhouse situation, where he had a TV, a VHS, a broken sofa, if I remember correctly. And one time he chose that this is the age I need to see Blade in. And I'm pretty sure we didn't watch the whole movie because there are a lot of, striking images that would have sent me to histrionics at age 5. But I remember that when the sort of third act starts, there's a scene where they put Blade into an Iron Maiden, and his whole, all of his blood is drained so it can feed the other vampires. And I found that to be the most terrifying thing of all time. And what made it even more terrifying was that we got caught. My grandma and my grandpa came to pick me up while we were in that clubhouse. And they weren't pleased that I was watching a movie like that, so they dragged me back to their cabin through what in my memory is a dark wood full of monsters. They did this, what you'd call a parenting maneuver, where instead of confirming I was okay and were trying to sort of see if whatever I saw was too much for me. They put me in a dark room and called my mom to ask her what the appropriate punishment would be. And in my memory, this took forever, as all of our punishments would, which mostly came down to the psychological warfare of waiting for the punishments, fearing that you might activate it by making your presence known, you know, that type of shit. Good parenting. And I think this moment, maybe more than any other, sort of molded me into the movie watcher I'm today, because having to sit in that uncomfortable feeling for what feels like forever, just playing the situation in my head over and over and over again, is sort of the thing I like to do with my movies these days. Like, I want to watch movies that are challenging in a way where I'm left to think about them. I want to ruminate on them, like in that physical, like literal sense. I want it to be hard to digest, but to have a lot of flavor. I want to acquire a taste and be on a scent and feel and see things I couldn't imagine before. And that's sort of the culmination of the art experience I want. And that was seated here. Like, it is a shitty memory, but without it, I don't think unfeatured films would exist, so I guess thanks. Alright, so let's do a little fast forward. Now we're in the 3rd grade, and we moved to a new town when my mom kidnapped us and blamed my then stepmom of being a pedophile to get custody, which she did because the judge, quote, just wanted to be sure. Anyways, the media thing sort of stays similar-ish. You know, Disney's still big. Digimon and Pokemon did change to Duel Masters and Beyblade, but they're sort of similar.
All I have to do is ride Tony the Tiger.
I was watching a lot of Cubics for whatever reason. It was just kind of on. There was a new channel that started broadcasting at the time called Sub TV, which was this edgier, more I don't give a fuck type channel that was owned by one of our other commercial broadcasting agencies. They started showing Dragon Ball Z and Magic Knight Ray Earth, which were both shows I had no context for. Like, I simply couldn't even understand that they were a part of an established thing. Like, you know, Pokemon and Digimon and Beyblade and the Moomins even are all anime. This was like different. The art styles were cooler. I had no idea what the fuck was going on, and I just couldn't put it in a context, which was strangely attractive to me. Like, I really wanted to figure it out. There was something to the way they approached their whole thing, like combining all of these genres, but also them being genres I've never even heard of, like shonen battle anime and magical girl and mecha. I was just constantly feeling overwhelmed, but in a very exciting way, which I feel is like a core experience most children should have. It is very enriching, and I kept watching both of those shows for as long as they ran on Finnish TV. I trace so much of my anime fandom to those moments instead of, you know, Digimon or Pokemon or whatever. Another kind of weirder TV related thing was that there was a cable channel that we somehow got in. There was this sort of ad channel that was running, you know, mattress ads and whatever. And then every now and again they would have a block where they had trailers for movies, but it was just for movies they constantly advertised, and those movies were the second Blade movie, the second Resident Evil movie, Ghost Ship, and Eight-Legged Freaks. When I first got my own money, I tracked all of those movies down, and they were all huge disappointments. Which I guess is sort of a, you know, a life lesson. But they did really affect me, so rest assured, RIP to that ad channel. You made a difference in somebody's life at least. But if we're talking about stuff that really made an impact on me, we need to talk about Lordi. Lordi is a Finnish hard rock band, and as you can see, they were monsters, so it was an immediate hit with me. I have this extremely vivid memory of sitting in my friend's bedroom and watching all of the music videos for their first album Get Heavy, and biking back home thinking, my life has just changed. I need to know everything there is to know about Lordi. And this was another hyperfixation pretty early on. You know, I couldn't imagine anything better. Like, their music was great, they were scary but also really cool looking, and they were huge to me at the time. And then their second album, The Monster-Icon Dream, dropped, and it was even better. And my father got me the special edition, which came with a little DVD that had all the music videos in it, but also this short movie called The Kin.
And I want everything to be ready by then.
And it's not a great movie, let's be real. It mostly exists as a merchandising exercise and trying to write a movie around a band that consists of a Valkyrian ghost, a predator alien, a mummy, a minotaur, and a Freddy Krueger in bio armor is a little difficult even at the best of times, and this wasn't the best of times, so, you know, the results speak for themselves. But to me, it was the coolest, most interesting, scary thing that had these characters I already loved in it. Like, my favorite band member was their drummer called Kita, who's the predator alien, and he has this scene where he chases down random side characters in the woods, and even to this day I think the lighting on this scene is gorgeous. But, you know, I'm of course a little bit biased because, you know, this was my childhood. Later down the line, Lordi would end up winning the Eurovision Song Contest, and that was the first time I felt truly vindicated for my media takes, because I was bullied throughout, you know, most of my elementary school for being a huge Lordi head. And when they won, it was this huge moment of national pride, and I was like, I was there when it happened. Like, you're all just jumping in the bandwagon. I was there when it was cool. And pretty much immediately after Lordi won, I kind of stopped caring because I just found some cooler stuff. The final nail to the Lordi coffin came in 2008 with the release of Dark Floors, the feature-length film they got to do after the Eurovision win. It is pretty fucking terrible. It has all the same issues as The Kin, especially when it comes to the Lordi members. Like, in The Kin, they're going for this dreamlike atmosphere, and in that framework they get to be these sudden appearances where they do a little boo, kill someone and go away. But in Dark Floors they have to be like set pieces, and that just really drains any energy and fright from them. Like, they are completely, utterly just meaningless within the context of the movie. And they're so easily defeated that whatever sort of reverence I had for them as a child was just gone, fully gone. And when I walked out of that theater, I was just happy that I got off the train when the getting was still good. Alright, time for another time skip, this time only a year forwards. We move again, and this is where I think my tastes start to shift towards the more live action oriented stuff, because my mom actually befriended a pirate. He was this person who came to our house, I think, like once a month. Like, they were driving past and they were coming in with this huge metal case full of burnt DVDs. And my mom was chronically depressed at the time. She was working as a guard doing night shift in a place that covered a gas station, a hospital, and a graveyard. And she was just like going through it very much. Anyway, she would watch a bunch of movies, so she would buy a bunch of movies from this pirate, and through that we ended up watching Jurassic Parks and Lord of the Rings and etc. So that was a huge change of pace. I don't think I have anything all that interesting to say about Lord of the Rings, but for Jurassic Park, that's a whole different story. So I think there's a general consensus that there's only one good Jurassic Park movie, and it's the first one, with every consecutive movie getting worse and worse, which means that from the original trilogy, the third one is the worst. I disagree. Of course, there's a lot of flaws to it. It is not well written. The whole Alan Raptor thing is...
Jason!
Well, famous. The mom character has a very annoying voice when she's screaming. But none of this mattered to me. My 10-year-old ass was there to just experience the dinosaurs. And boy, does the third movie really deliver on the set pieces. Just from the top of my head, I really love the sequence on the airstrip. I love the raptor trap. I love Spinosaur having a phone in its stomach and busting through the electric fence. I love the sequence with the pterodactyls. But most of all, the scene I really treasure is the one in the science facility with all of the Tetsuo-looking raptor fetuses, the raptor that's behind a glass wall, and most of all, this one shot of a raptor being trapped, calling for help while climbing over that door. I can't explain it, just makes my brain go brrr, you know? Like, it's so good. Just the sound itself is very particularly terrifying and alien sounding, but then you also have this very imposing silhouette and all of these steel nets, and it's just so good. I saw Jurassic Park 3 first, then I saw the first one and then the second one, but for me the third one has a very special place in my heart. And would I like to see it again currently? Well, not really, but will I watch clips from it on YouTube? You bet your ass I do. While all of this was going on, I also forged a very pivotal friendship that changed everything for me. This friend had a very sad life. His parents were alcoholics and they weren't really around, but they did give him money we used to rent out movies from the local kiosk. And the thing is that for whatever reason, the kiosk owner would let us rent any fucking movie we wanted, and most of those movies were horror movies. This person is the reason I found my genre. We would watch stuff like Jason X,
Classic.
Freddy vs. Jason,
Classic.
the Devilman OVA,
Classic.
both of the Jeepers Creepers movies on repeat. Maybe not that one, but Tomb of Dracula, which is, by the way, another victim of an incredible Finnish dub.
Se oli jo varmaan Dracula, siitä ei ole epäilystäkään.
Hamburger Dracula is another classic, and most importantly, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is something I'll be returning to in the next chapter. But just getting exposed to these movies completely derailed my direction in life. Like, it was somewhat simpatico with the whole monster thing, but actively seeking out this challenging media form that was too much for me. The last time I had any brush with it, with Blade, just completely enveloped me in this new way of thinking. I was ravenous for any sort of horror movie at the time, which we were watching completely against my mom's wishes. But outside of discovering our favorite genre together, our friendship was a little bit darker. We were a terrible influence on each other. Both of us were fucked up for parental reasons, and that led us to doing some really dangerous and stupid stuff, like chasing each other around with a shark knife he had through the backyards of his neighbors. And every now and again we got access to a bunch of scythes and sickles because the handyman of his apartment building just left the shed unattended. Which of course isn't the fault of the movies we were watching, like no normal kid would do this shit. And it was just kind of like we were really acting up. We also stole a bunch of stuff, like of course candy from the store, but also like random bits and bobs from our woodworking class, which we would then bury to the side of the river. We went on this big heist, like through a toy store and the kiosk we used to rent movies from, to another kiosk we got caught in, and we just kind of biked back to his place because he gave his number to the kiosk owner, and we ran inside and we were just like, oh no, don't answer that, that's a telemarketer. And her mom believed us because she really didn't care. And we moved pretty soon after that, and I became a much more demure boy again. But those were some wild years.